to episode 113 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is already in spring break mode, John Scott Sloat.
I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm in spring break mode yet.
What does spring break mode look like for you?
Normally traveling. So
yes, and that's going to be true this time.
That's going to be true this year, which it was not true last year. So,
yeah.
Although we had a shortened spring break last year, right? It was like 3 days, like a long weekend, really.
Sure. I don't remember. Like
last year's such a blur.
Such a blur. I don't even know what normal is anymore on so many things. But yes. It was a short spring break last year because of COVID stuff, right?
Yeah, I think so. However, yeah, I'll be in Atlanta. We leave Saturday. So me and 15 students and Brent in Grace College or whatever we call him on here.
Brent in Winona Lake?
Yeah, Brent in Winona Lake. So
yeah.
we're taking a group of 15 to Atlanta.
Okay. Yes. Well, that should be a good trip. Atlanta's a fun city.
Yes. We don't have – so another group is putting on our trip for us. They are scheduling us, and we've been requesting like a schedule for a few weeks now, maybe a month, and we haven't gotten it yet. We leave on Saturday. So still awaiting that, and that can be frustrating. Although, I had a trip to Asia one time where the group did not even recognize that we were coming until about 3 days before we left. So this compared to that is just very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, it can feel a little unsettling, right?
Oh, yeah.
To turn the planning over to someone and trust that it's going to be in place for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Given our mystery trip experiences where we've had to literally plan everything.
Every detail.
Yeah.
Down to restaurants.
Yes.
That we go to.
Yeah. I was telling someone the other day, I think I'm getting closer to the point where I'm ready to consider another mystery trip if you eliminated the COVID stuff. Like, I don't want to have to deal with testing to get on the plane and all, and like if we get to a point where mask mandates really aren't happening around the globe and that sort of thing, where things are essentially back to normal, I think I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to consider another mystery trip. What about you?
Yeah, I consider it.
Yeah.
Yep, I consider it again. What I think is funny is we led the last one we led was in 2019.
That's right.
And that was the last true one to happen.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like obviously last year's 2020's got canceled.
Right.
2021, I don't think anything happened.
Correct. No trips.
This year there's a domestic one over spring break.
Right.
Which I suppose is mystery, but it's not international.
Right.
So we were the last one, and I remember being on that trip saying Mystery Trip 2020. That's this trip, because I thought it sounded way better than Mystery Trip 2019.
Yeah.
And it was the closest thing to a mystery trip that existed in 2020.
That's true. So, all right, let's get the.
Yeah, we riffed up quite a bit there.
The particulars
that was a little long.
No, that's fine. It's fine. It's our show. We can do what we want. You can find us on Twitter at V&S Pod. Email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We are also on Facebook and on YouTube, Various and Sundry Podcast. We would love for you to leave a 5-star rating, and a lovely review would be nice as well.
Yeah, a lovely review. 5-star.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, only the best for us here. So, all right, John, let's jump into the world of sports.
Crickets.
Yeah, not as much going on. We're a little bit in the lull here. I mean, the NBA is resuming from its All-Star break, and college basketball is starting to ramp up next. Not this upcoming week, but it's the following week. That's conference tournaments, and that's when it kind of feels like
that's when it starts.
March
for me.
Madness has arrived. Yeah, but this weekend, interestingly enough, 7 top 10 teams lost.
A lot of parity.
Yeah.
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 Should be fun.
You would think that makes for a good, wide open NCAA tournament coming up. And speaking of which, we have breaking news.
Yeah, we do have our yearly, second year in a row, third attempted year in a row.
Yeah, I mean, we would have done it in 2020 except for the fact that COVID took out the tournament.
Yeah, so we are doing our bracket challenge again for pod listeners. If you were a part of it last year, I think I sent you an email this morning or Monday morning. It says this drops on Tuesday, inviting you back. But we will put the link in the show notes to the bracket. Invite whoever you want, really.
Yeah. We had how many participate last year?
I think it was like 32, maybe.
Yeah. And remind me who won last year?
I believe I did.
Yeah.
I won.
Which kind of undercut the, hey, whoever wins will get a signed copy of one of Doc's books when you have all my books.
Signed copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, also. So if you want to join, you can either follow the link in the show notes. We'll put it in there for you.
And we might even throw it up on social media as well.
Yeah, we can do that. And then the password, if you want to get into it, is V and S pod, capital V, capital S, the word and V and S pod.
Okay.
And then the group itself is just called Various and Sundry Podcast. Okay. So if you're going on the Yahoo website searching it, you can search it that way too.
Excellent. Okay.
Also in college basketball news, Grace men's basketball.
Yes.
Beat Indiana Wesleyan.
Yes. And so when this episode drops, it'll be game day for the Grace men as they will play for the Crossroads League Championship at Marian University in Indianapolis. I will be there.
Oh, you're going?
I'm going. Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Why's that? Just to support the guys?
Yeah, it'll be a fun day.
Okay.
Fun trip.
Okay.
Taking my youngest son with me.
Sure, I assume so. Yeah.
And our oldest son, my oldest son, lives in the Indianapolis area, so he's going to meet us at the game. So
okay.
Yeah, should be fun.
Very nice. How is Marion's gym?
I've never been there.
Okay. Anytime I go to a Crossroads League Roads gym, it always feels like I'm unimpressed. Like,
yeah, I can't say that I've been to many of them. I've seen a number of them like on live streams.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any question we have the nicest arena in the league.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So
Bethel's is pretty good.
Yeah, it's all right.
Goshen's is just weird. Have you ever been to Goshen's?
Yeah.
That's a weird arena.
Well, right, because it's just their like student rec center.
And they roll out bleachers halfway through, and
Yeah.
there's a big fan. Have you seen that giant fan in there? I mean, my goodness.
Spring Arbor is sort of the same way.
I've never been to Spring Arbor.
But they do theirs a little differently, so it feels more like an actual gym. So, but yeah, I'm curious to see what the Marion gym looks like. I'm sure in light of this part of the episode, we will get some significant feedback from Nate in Ohio, who has been to all of the Crossroads leagues.
I'm sure he'll have a ranking for us.
Yes, I'm sure he will come through in the clutch there for us. So I assume we're going to offer a signed copy of one of my books.
That sounds like it's up to you as the author of the book.
I mean, we're sitting in the room where the largest private collection of my books other than my own exists. So we could probably snag one of those.
What did we give away last year? Or what were we going to give away last year?
I think it was up to the listener.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing that's come out since then has been the Galatians commentary. So that's a new option there.
That'd be a wrinkle. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, sweet.
So, yeah, we'll keep talking about that, but you can go ahead and sign up now, even though the brackets won't be released for another 2 weeks.
Yeah. And then
talk some Major League Baseball. Yeah,
so Monday was the deadline. It's weird to say that since we're recording in Monday, but this drops Tuesday. The owners have that's the line in the sand of when if there's not a deal done, we lose regular season games. The players have called that a soft deadline.
Okay.
And I'm willing to bet it's more of a soft deadline. Like if they got a deal done Wednesday, I'm willing to bet they could. I think games are supposed to start like March 31st or April 1st.
Okay.
But they would get the game started by then. I think they would still figure it out.
And I have not followed how the negotiations are going. Is there any indication that they're even close?
They're meeting.
Okay.
I mean, they met 3 times yesterday, and they're caucusing. That's a word that was thrown out a lot in the last couple of days, where like there'd be a proposal. The two groups would separate to their side of the room and discuss, and then come back together and discuss more. So that at least feels like progress. I don't think anybody wants to lose the regular season or lose regular season games.
Yeah.
But I think they're willing to. I think both sides are willing to.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with economics and competitive balance taxing and all sorts of stuff. And yeah.
Yeah. And is there any talk about salary cap?
Players won't allow a salary cap. The question is the luxury tax. The players argue that the luxury tax – are you familiar with the luxury tax?
Yep.
Okay. Basically, if they – for our listeners out there, if they exceed that, they got to pay a tax to the league.
Right. So the league sets a number of arbitrarily, let's say $400 million or something like that.
Yep.
And if a team spends more than that on payroll, they pay a tax to the league on the overage.
That's right. So the players argue that's a functional salary cap, and they really want to raise that ceiling. However, owners don't. Particularly small market owners don't want to raise that ceiling. So there's a lot of
because they don't have the money to get to the maximum to max out on their salaries. Right. Basically,
that's their argument. I don't know if that's true. They make the case that running a major league team isn't that profitable. Like you don't get a lot of cash. Like the team may grow in value over time, but you don't get that much dollar.
You don't generate a lot of revenue.
Yeah, that's their argument, and players have said that's a load of crap. Basically,
But doesn't most of the revenue come from television rights?
Yes, I believe so.
And probably merchandise sales and that sort of thing. Because I feel like when I do happen upon baseball games on television, it feels rare, except for postseason, that the stands are full. Or even when I see highlights on SportsCenter, that a lot of these games are being played in stadiums that are half full.
Yeah, and I think most owners make their money off postseason television. But they spread it between all the owners, I believe. All that postseason television money.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. What a world. What a world. Are you optimistic they'll figure it out relatively quickly?
No, I'm not.
So you think
I had been up until this week, and I don't know that I have a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
They just don't seem very close to me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on that. Speaking of things we're keeping an eye on, there's no easy way to make this transition. So we're going to move from things that in this grand scheme of eternity don't mean a lot probably to things that are far weightier. And I think all of us have probably to some degree been following the events unfolding in the Ukraine. And, I think we should reiterate, though people I'm sure don't expect this from us, but we are not experts in geopolitics.
No.
We are not going to discuss what the U.S. should or should not be doing and all of that kind of stuff. Because quite frankly, I feel like I don't know enough to enter in intelligently into those conversations.
Yeah, and all possibilities seem really like they all have serious potential drawbacks, and it's like picking the worst of all options,
Yeah. And I will say one thing that shows a disappointing element of our current culture here in the U.S. is how the moment that the Russians began invading the Ukraine, that it felt like people from both sides, really extremes of the political spectrum, simply saw this event through the lens of whatever their particular political and cultural commitments are, and tried to fit it into their narrative of, see, this proves that. When I would just suggest maybe a wiser response would be, this is awful, and we should pray.
Absolutely.
And see if there's ways that we can encourage and help our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
But it's just
there was a Twitter thread that a guy in the UK did where he was just pulling in when people did that, or it was like, oh, really? The Russian invasion of Ukraine is about abortion, or
Yes.
really the Russian invasion of Ukraine is about anti-abortion, or
I saw that thread. It's great.
It's
in the sense of like exposing the ridiculousness of,
and it's both funny and really sad that thread exists.
Yeah.
It's like 26 or 27 points long.
Yeah. This shows it's about white supremacy. This shows it's about CRT. Like,
Yeah.
or maybe it's just about Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it has very little, if anything, to do with our political and cultural issues.
Yeah. So what are some thoughts you've had just as you've been, I'm sure, refreshing Twitter and the news? What is sort of your reflections been through all of this?
Yeah, it's been it's just been sobering to think about the loss of life.
Yeah.
To think about just the instability it creates in our world. But ultimately just to think about the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about hearing reports from pastors, hearing one report of a guy on a Saturday night saying, well, I'm still prepping to preach. If my church is there tomorrow morning, I'm going in and I'm preaching,
Yeah.
It could be entirely blown up. Who knows? But
Yeah.
I'm going to preach tomorrow, and anybody who can make it, I'm going to preach to them and care for them and love them and, those kinds of things. As well as missionaries deciding to stay. And again, I think that's a difficult, kind of calculus to figure out. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that.
Sure.
So I'm not in any way denigrating those who leave the country, but also wanting to admire those who are willing to stay and wanting to just continue to pray. And that can feel so helpless in a lot of ways, but if God is the one who can move the hearts of kings, he can move the heart of a man like Vladimir Putin and move him to stop and pull back.
Yeah.
So you just hope that maybe the Lord will answer that. What about you? What are some of the thoughts that have been unfolding for you?
Yeah, thinking a lot about Psalm 2, the one who sits in heaven, why do the nations rage, and the one who sits in heaven laughs, and that God is ultimately fulfilling his purposes through everything that's happening. But I also try to remember that this, like what we've experienced probably over the last 30 or 40 years of relative stability in the world is not the norm for human history.
Yeah.
That the norm throughout human history has been invasion, land grabs, all sorts of things. And that by far is the norm.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I mean, in addition to what you said, I saw that thread of the pastor going like, if my church is there tomorrow, I'll go preach. Not something a calculus we make necessarily.
No. And I do think this is where the sort of transnational, transcultural unity of the body of Christ is something that reemerges in these kinds of circumstances where you certainly want to enter in and pray for your brothers and sisters. There's there's plenty of articles out there. The Gospel Coalition has a helpful article. It's got some suggested prayer requests. Nothing that's, earth-shattering in the sense of things you wouldn't necessarily think about, but in terms of, God's protection over his people, openings to preach the gospel in the midst of great suffering and unrest, how to best serve people in need, wisdom for leaders and pastors, and how do you care well for your flock in the midst of these kinds of horrors? So, just I think something that it would be wise for us to lead with prayer on these things, and maybe dial back on some of the hot takes when it comes to feeling like we have to tie everything to our own cultural or political narratives that we like. And again, please hear me clearly. That's a shot at both sides, both extremes.
Yes.
Because both extremes are doing it. So, but yeah, just find ways to be mindful and pray specifically for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. And I also point out there have been protests in cities in Russia against the war in both St. Petersburg and in Moscow. So, I think it can be easy to make the knee-jerk reaction of Russia bad. And obviously, Putin is the aggressor here. But at the same time, you have some of the Russian people who are like, we don't stand for this. We don't want this. So,
and they are going to suffer as well.
Exactly.
And I think the West generally is trying to squeeze Putin a little bit, but I think in squeezing Putin, you squeeze a lot of Russian citizens.
There's going to be collateral damage, just as there is in like actual carrying out of physical warfare. Carrying out of economic warfare is also going to bring about the suffering of people on the streets, when you have economic suffering. So, all right.
Again, no easy way
to move on, so we're just going to do it. We wanted to revisit a topic that we've talked about, I think, early in the history of the pod.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the benefit of learning and I would say also maintaining and using the biblical languages.
Yeah.
And again, obviously, you could say, well, you guys are biased. Well, sure we are. We both teach Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we wouldn't do it if we didn't think it didn't have value.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll start with why don't you share a little bit, John, about your own experience as a student first in learning the biblical languages?
So I started Greek my senior year of college. You were my professor.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that class specifically.
Yep.
That would have been the fall of 2009.
Okay.
I think. I was in there with Newhart and Copeland. Yeah. Do you remember you remember that group?
I do. Yeah.
Anyway, so I took Greek. I came in horrified. Like I had no idea what I was getting into. I just had no basis for what I was doing. So I was totally fresh, learning the alphabet, all these things, was horrified. Getting a few lessons into it, I think gave me some confidence that if I took the time and did the vocabulary, did a good job memorizing the paradigms, that I could do it. I could make my way through Greek and not just do okay, but excel.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was like initially learning it for me. It was an intense fear and horror.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, I kind of like looked under the bed and realized the monster wasn't really that scary.
Okay.
How about yourself? What was it like?
Well, my experience was a little different in the sense that I took 2 years of Greek at a public university. So learning more holistically ancient Greek.
Sure.
Not just Koine Greek, which is the specific dialect spoke and written in the time of Jesus. So in some ways that helped, and in other ways that was a challenge. But I was not a great language student. I was a good language student, but not a great language student. And it was something that didn't come super easy to me. Like I wouldn't say I struggled, but I also wasn't like, it just came instantly to me. I didn't have to work at it. So so I can still identify with students from the perspective of you got to work at this a little bit. And it's not necessarily – there's going to be some who just are naturals, who just have good language brains and just it clicks, and others who don't have good language brains, and it's a dogfight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's think a little bit about why do you think the biblical languages are valuable? And maybe I'll just say we're talking biblical languages. We're going to focus probably a little bit more on Greek just because obviously that's what we teach.
Sure.
But we gladly affirm the value and importance of Hebrew as well for the Old Testament.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does Greek do for us? I do think there is a sense in which Greek, forces us to step into the shoes of somebody else. Mm-hmm. Like as we read something in English, we bring with it a set of biases and and a set of lenses that we read something a certain way, and it causes us to go by really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And I think being able to try to like put on first century shoes, so to speak, and walk around in sort of their world in that language does teach us about their language in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One of the ways I think this, as I've been sitting in your Sunday school class the past, 6-8 months now?
Yeah, since September.
Is how much Luke, where we use the word complete, Luke will use the word fulfill. There's a very different sense to it,
Yeah, it's his, I would say, not so subtle way, but things that get lost in translation sometimes, of reminding the reader that this is part of God's plan that's working itself out. So I think, and that leads me to a second sort of a corresponding benefit, is that there are just things you cannot see in translation that you see in the original languages. And even the best of English translations that will try to bring that out can't always consistently bring out connections within a text. So one example that I thought of, and this will be throwing a bone to our to the Old Testament folks, is when it comes to Genesis 16, the story of Abram and Sarah using Hagar to try to produce the child of promise. There is such a emphasis in that passage on words that are connected to the idea of sight. And that idea is repeated throughout, but just by the nature of English translation, you don't always get to see that that's what's going on. But if you're reading through it in the Hebrew, you begin to see, oh my goodness, there's all these uses of the verb communicating the idea of sight. And that's just a helpful window into what's going on, that God is the one who sees what's going on and is sovereignly superintending that. And there are obviously examples in the New Testament as well. I'd say related to that is oftentimes you can see more clearly the structure of a passage when you're working through it in the original language as opposed to an English translation. And that can give you a window into what the author is emphasizing in a passage. I find that, I'm teaching right now Greek Exegesis 1, and we do chunks of Philippians in there. And as you work through Philippians 2, 1 through 4, it's a kind of a big if-then statement is a big chunk of that. But then there's this whole list of participles that come into English in a lot of translations that can just kind of look like this series of do this and don't do this and do this and do this and don't do that. But when you study it in Greek, you realize that all of those are actually telling you what it looks like to have the same mindset. And so it's not just this random collection of things that are nice to do and not nice to do. But it's the idea here is this is what it looks like to have the mindset of Christ ultimately. And these are the 5 or 6 different ways that works itself out. So even in a preaching and teaching context, that can help you kind of organize and say, this is what the author is really emphasizing, rather than just looking at a block of text and going, well, what do I like best out of that? I'm really into this. There we go. That becomes so I sort of make a whole lesson or message out of that, when really that's not even the main point of the passage. So the languages help you see, I think, what the main emphasis of a passage is. Yeah,
and I think it does help us cut through the clutter of our own brain, right? Preconceived notions, things that we want to place on the text. It does help us cut through that.
Absolutely. Another thing I would add is the fact that it forces you to slow down in otherwise familiar passages. Being familiar with the biblical text in an English translation is a good thing, so please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. But you can come across passages where you're like, I've read this how many times? 12 times? 25 times? 50 times as I read through the Bible, or it's just a well-known, familiar passage. And then you slow down and you read it in the original language, and you begin to see things. You begin to notice things that a quick blitz through reading doesn't reveal. So even at a minimum, even if you're not going to take all of this extensive time to dig into the original languages, even just forcing yourself to slow down to read it in the original language can often be very illuminating to help you see things that you've not fully recognized or even appreciated in previous times reading a text.
And I think that's absolutely true. That's something that we talk about in Greek 1, that slowing down is really a good thing. And I would say it's getting easier and easier to study the original languages, maybe than it was 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, we've never lived in a time period where it's been easier. The number of resources available, both print and digital, is just remarkable when it comes to this. So ultimately, I would say there is no excuse if you're an English speaker. There's really no excuse other than you are unable or unwilling to devote the time to do it.
And I think that's the hurdle, right? It takes consistent daily time.
Yeah.
And there's no substitute for that. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah. I might qualify the word daily and just say regular.
Okay.
For example, I think if you devote even a few times a week where you open your Greek New Testament or your Hebrew Old Testament and try to read for 10 or 15 minutes, that can go an enormous way.
Oh, yeah.
To helping you maintain and use it. I know we regularly tell students one of the best ways to maintain it is to use it in the context of teaching or studying. So if you have opportunity to lead a Sunday school class or a small group even, to take the time to read through your passage in the original language and work through it and see what's there can be just a simple way of trying to keep up with it. And as you mentioned earlier, there's never been more resources available to help you with this. I think I mentioned this in our first episode of this year in terms of setting out one of my goals was to kind of refresh my Hebrew.
Yeah.
So I've picked up where I left off in terms of reading trying to read, depending on the length of the psalm, a psalm a day in Hebrew. With a Reader's Hebrew edition where I'm looking at the footnotes to help me see unfamiliar vocabulary and things like that. And having an English text handy nearby to be able to say, okay, even though I think I know the words, I'm not putting this together.
Yeah.
Let me check. Okay, yeah. And it's paying off. It gets a little easier as you invest more time in it.
Do you still do vocabulary cards for Hebrew?
On occasion. I don't do them consistently. I need to I've explored – there's an app that I need to sort of set up to work on that, to get the I think it's the Bible vocab app. I think I
recommend this for Greek.
Yeah. So I think
Bible vocab plus.
Plus. Okay. Yeah. So that tends to be one of the big barriers for people is the vocab.
Oh yeah.
It's frustrating when you have to look up every other word. But
Bible vocab plus, by the way, if you're a Greek, if you've taken Greek or feel like you got a good grasp of it, or Hebrew, you can actually set up passages in there as well. They have a number of textbooks that correspond to chapters in there that you can use, but they also have passages where you can say, I want to know the vocabulary 25 times or less from this book of the Bible. And
right.
You can do it that way.
Yeah, that's great if you're studying a particular book of the Bible, or maybe your pastor's preaching through, or if you are doing the teaching through a book where you could set up the vocabulary and say, okay, I just need to hammer away at the vocab of this particular book of the Bible. That can be really helpful. And I think, too, having a working knowledge of the biblical languages also opens up a whole range of tools for you that otherwise are harder to use, whether it's commentaries or other sorts of resources that if you just have a working grasp of the language, you're going to be able to use a wider range of resources to help you understand the biblical text.
Yeah, I agree. I think being able to at least be conversant in not the text itself, but in like the language of original languages, you can do quite a bit of reading and quite a bit of study.
Yeah. And I think one thing that, as we're maybe thinking about, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, I took Greek, I took Hebrew, but it was years ago and I've basically feel like I've lost it or almost lost it. How do I get restarted? Well, one thing that can be super, super helpful is try to find a buddy. So you're not just trying to do it on your own. We encourage that as students are going through their language learning here, for them to meet up outside of class and work together on homework and studying to help each other out and brainstorm to labor together in those ways.
Do homework in groups.
Yeah.
Meet for each homework assignment, meet twice. Do half of it, go away, come back together, do the second half so you have to relearn it again. That can always be really, really good. I'd also say the Daily Dose websites are coming out with some great stuff. So Daily Dose of Greek, Daily Dose of Hebrew. They send you a 2-minute video every day breaking down a single verse.
Yeah.
Really handy.
And that's, like you said, you can sign up for their email updates and it's in your email inbox every morning. Every weekday morning.
Every weekday morning.
There's one for the weekend, I think. So
yeah, usually a little bit different, pointing out a resource or something like that.
Yeah. So even just watching those 2-minute videos can be a great way of keeping your languages somewhat fresh, but there's just no substitute for working in the text yourself, whether it's for prepping to teach or whatever you might be doing. But yeah, I think and it's worth it.
Absolutely.
It's worth it. It's hard work, absolutely, but there are just things that you see in the biblical text that are not going to be available to you just reading through translation. Having said that, obviously, we're blessed in English. There's a lot of good translations. But there's just no substitute for working in the original languages.
Absolutely.
Sure. We've got some articles that we'll link to in the show notes that touch on some of these reasons we've talked about. But I think it's time for us to move on to this day in sports history.
Yeah, so March 1st. Happy March 1st, everyone.
Yeah.
1969, on this day, the New York Yankees' Mickey Mantle announces his retirement due to a knee injury persisting. Finishes 18-season career with 536 home runs and almost a 300 average.
Yeah.
That's like unheard of today.
Yeah. Pretty much. All or nothing today, right?
93. The Yankees – why are we so Yankees heavy today?
Just read the rest of it.
George Steinbrenner is reinstated as general partner of the team, and he was banned because of his relationship with convicted gambler Howie Spira?
I think so. See, it's negative. I know you're not.
I'm not a George Steinbrenner fan.
George is getting angry.
George is getting
That was low-key a good sort of minor character on Seinfeld.
Oh, absolutely.
The George Steinbrenner
played by Larry David, I believe.
Was it?
I believe so, yeah. 96, Atlanta's Lenny Wilkens becomes the first coach in NBA history to reach 1,000 career victories when the Hawks beat the Cavaliers 74-68.
Okay.
Not a great offensive game, 74-68.
No. Though, when was that? It's the 90s.
Yeah.
Where it was basically football on a basketball court. They've changed how they play and officiate since then.
2009, Stephen Holcomb pilots USA 1 sled in the 4-man competition at the World Bobsled Championships in Mount Von Hovenberg, New York. Did I get that right?
I sure.
First American win in the event in 50 years.
Okay.
Man. And that's all we got.
It was a thin day in sports history, March 1st, apparently.
Yeah. Who do you like? There's very few actual. The
bobsled.
The bobsled's really the only athletic achievement.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't. The coaching thing is an athletic achievement.
Sure.
But I'd be fine with going with the bobsled. I mean, my guess is we're probably not going to have too many more
You don't
opportunities.
think we'll dip into like the Jamaican bobsled team? And
Probably not. I mean, I think every January and February we'll have a shot at bobsled, just on how dates fall because of the Olympics. But I'm willing to go with the bobsledders.
Sounds good.
One thing you liked.
Little recency bias there. 2009.
Yeah, well.
Anyway, I've been listening to a podcast the last couple of weeks. I think it was new in the new year. Plain English. Have you heard of this?
I don't think I have.
So it's a Ringer podcast with Atlantic author Derek Thompson.
Okay.
It's a
What do
good
they
one.
talk about?
Well, he does. He'll have a sports episode every now and then, but mostly it's current events, politics, things like that.
Okay.
And he's usually a pretty balanced take kind of guy. I always appreciate Derek. So Plain English with Derek Thompson.
Plain English. Okay. I'm going to go with a recent kind of murder mystery book I read by Peter Swanson called 8 Perfect Murders.
Ooh.
Which sort of you got to be careful about giving too much away. But basically, there's this guy that owns a bookshop who, years before a series of crimes start to take place, wrote a blog post of 8 perfect murders in fiction. And so, going through murder mysteries and picking out 8 murders and calling them, perfect murders, basically. Well, then somebody begins to actually commit very similar murders, like that person is working through the list of 8 perfect murders. Yep,
is that it?
That's it.
Oh,
yep. So it's on Scribd. Yeah.
It's on Scribd.
So, I've been on a roll in terms of reading kind of murder mystery thriller kind of stuff, just leisure reading. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. I might have another one, not a murder mystery book, but I just started an audiobook today that I think might end up as a one thing I liked down the road.
Okay.
So we'll see if it pans out. But all right, we have talked some spring break trips, right?
Yeah.
We talked mystery trip. We talked college basketball. We talked tournament challenge. A reminder, you can sign up already for our NCAA tournament bracket challenge through the Yahoo website. We'll have the link in.
And are we giving away one of your books?
We'll do it. Okay. It's fine.
Sounds great.
It's fine. We'll give away a signed copy of one of my books.
Wow.
And maybe this year someone will win it besides one of us. I mean, it'd be kind of ironic if I won it this year. So
yeah, I hope to win again. I'll say that.
Yeah, I'm sure. My sons will participate, and they'll be like, "That's not really much of a gift, Dad." But some people might find it. They would enjoy a copy of one of my books. So we talked that. We, on a more serious note, talked about the situation in Ukraine and a reminder to pray. We've talked about the benefit of learning and maintaining the biblical languages. We talked about the American Bobsled Team. And we've talked about a podcast John likes and a book that I like. So I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. Are you ready to call mission accomplished?
I think so.
Okay. So that means that all that's left to say is until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.